Hello and welcome back to Forza Motorsport 7. Now, with drift suspension out, I wanted to see that. Now everyone else is just drifting about having fun. But I've been doing that too. It's very fun. It's a very good system, by the way. But what I was focusing on today is what happens when you don't drift with drift suspension. Does it help you in a racing situation? And to do that, I would have to compare it to the other suspensions. Sport, race, and then the drift. So, we have to test out those suspensions. And I was also curious on seeing if the amount of angle you tune your wheels at, your steering angle, if that would make any difference in terms of lap time. So, I got a fast car, and I got a slow car, and then I went to some technical tracks with lots of different types of corners. Now, for the slow vehicle, we are using a stock D-Class Honda Civic. And this is a really interesting comparison because this one is front-wheel drive, obviously. And the fast car will be rear-wheel drive. So, I'm going to see those two different drive lines. And the Civic here, this is on sport suspension. All the cars come on street suspension, so there's no way to do that. And, well, the suspension only adds like 2, maybe 3 PI per increase. So it doesn't add very much PI. Yeah, I was interested to see if it would make any difference. Now, my general rule of thumb when regarding lap times for these type of things is there's obviously different lines, slightly different lines taken. Some laps are better than others. So, I normally say half a second around that point is where I consider it substantially different. Because you can lose a couple of tenths of a second by getting too much wheel spin on the corner. So, yeah, half a second is usually my zone of it's substantial enough to consider it a difference. And you can see now I turn in way too early. And yeah, it was interesting comparing for like the original game suspension and then the drift suspension. Now, this Civic here is on the drift suspension. I don't really understand what drift suspension does in regards to the stiffness and the dampness and all that stuff. But I would imagine it makes it incredibly stiff so that it doesn't wobble around when drifting. Because what's interesting here is your driver does not use the full steering lock. No matter the drifting angle. You see, the drift suspension automatically starts off the car at 60 degrees of angle. And you don't use that when you're going around a track. Even with drift suspension, you have the capability, no matter how hard you turn, unless you drift, it doesn't go into that angle mode. And I found that very strange. Because I would think that the more angle you have in your turning radius, or the smaller the turning radius would be, which would be ideal for hairpins. But you don't use it. Like, coming up to this hairpin-ish thing, coming up, they don't use the full steering angle. It's weird. I don't understand why. Maybe because they don't want to be uncontrollable or something, or it might turn too sharply, I don't know. But regardless, it's basically race suspension. Now, maybe this steering angle does something you just don't see it, but the times are really interesting. Because, alright, the street suspension did in 2 minutes dead, basically, 2 minutes 0.7. Sport did 159.5, which is a second faster. Racing was 0.6 of a second faster than that. And then drift suspension was 0.5 of a second faster than the race suspension. And that is right on my threshold. So that is, I would say that is substantial. Drifting suspension is actually half a second faster than a race suspension. So in the lower classes so far, it's a pretty good idea. You wouldn't really think of it because it's not very much more PI, and it doesn't use its steering angle, which I thought would be the main advantage. But something about what it does to the suspension and the roll bars and all that stuff, it just makes it a faster car. Might make it stiffer, might make it easier to turn, has better weight distribution, I don't know. But it is substantially faster. And that was I did not expect it to be that far away, like that far ahead. I did not expect that. However, that was with a D-class car. What happens when we jump up to low S-class? So, what if we have, say, a 500, 600 horsepower Corvette ZR1? And this one right here is on its base street suspension. So, it is a bit wobbly for a supercar anyway. It's very fast, and that speed may actually be more beneficial for the street suspension. For the drift suspension. That's my idea. Because the faster you go, the more steering angle you need. Look at the Formula 1 cars. They can turn their wheels super far. Because they need to in order to have the steering at high speeds. So maybe the faster car will get a better result from the drift suspension. And that really wasn't the case. Because you see, the drift suspension wasn't faster than the racing suspension in the Corvette. I don't understand how any of this works. But, admittedly, it is very minor. It is very minor. We'll get to the times in just a second, but the racing suspension and the drift suspension felt identical. They don't feel any different except for when you drift. But in the slower cars, it's substantially quicker, much quicker on drift suspension. But on the higher cars, it's actually the opposite. So, yeah, I don't really understand how any of that works. But, there you go. And you can see the times coming up now. The Street did 145, the Sport did 144, so it's a second faster. The race was a second faster than that, 143.1. And the Drift was a 143.4. Now that is not very substantial, because it is only 0.3 of a second. So it may or may not have been down to a slightly better lap, or a slightly better angle in a turn, or whatever, but drift suspension is, at best, identical to race. And at its worst, it's slower, as opposed to the Civic, which is faster than race suspension. I was not expecting that. I was thinking the opposite would happen, and then the opposite of my opposite thinking happened. So, yeah, there you go. So, drift suspension is useful for D-Class, C-Class, E-Class. Next time you're in a public lobby or a private lobby, go for the drift suspension. It's actually very useful. Just don't use it in the faster cars. Now, just for some comparisons, I wanted to see how the angle of your tuning for your steering angle would affect the lap times. Now, obviously I was driving sensibly, but since this was the first lap, I didn't really care. And I needed a very technical track, which is why I chose Lime Rock. Now, Lime Rock with both chicanes is one of the most technical tracks that I know of. And I thought that would be a pretty good test of the steering angle to see if it made any difference. And well, certainly from driving it, this is obviously until a 60-degree steering angle, based on my exuberant driving at the beginning. But, honestly, it made no difference in terms of the driving feel, because you simply didn't use that much more steering angle. You see, I'm not really using more. Now, I was just curious on this one. And the lap times really show that you don't use all of your steering angle, because they are pretty much identical. If you look at it, the Civic was a bit more substantial. The Civic had a 0.4 of a second gap, 0.5 of a second between all the times, which is almost substantial, with 50 degrees being the slowest for some reason, and 40 degrees being marginally faster. But the Corvettes were all within 0.3 of a second, going in order from highest to lowest in terms of fastest lap time. 60 degrees was the slowest, 50 degrees was the next, and then 40 degrees was the fastest. So, long story short, drift suspension as a whole in slower cars is good. The angle at which you tune it has no bearing whatsoever. And if you put it in a higher car, you're expected to be a bit slower than a comparable vehicle with race suspension. And once again, the angle makes absolutely no difference. So, yeah. There you go. I was not expecting that. But that is your tuning lesson of the day. Drift suspension can be useful. You just gotta be a little careful with it. But that's gonna be it for this episode of Forza Motorsport. So I'll be back with more.